Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Matrix Mash number 20. I was 23. No, I think it's 20. Well, whatever it is, it's the point 2 because we didn't finish. We had too much Matrix to mash. The Matrix keeps multiplying manyfold, so that leaves a lot to mash. So this is part 2 from last week, and we were kind of having a little pre-show chat. It started to get interesting, so I decided to just start rolling it. Robert is still pulling up the things he wants to share on screen, but we were just starting to talk about an interview that Spiro did with Patrick Wood that got taken down, and Robert was beginning to tell me what they had been talking about during this, and so Robert, fill me in.
Yeah, so I watched the interview a couple nights ago, and first of all, I want to say I really enjoyed watching that guy's content because he's very clear and very humble and not a lot of hyperbole. I really appreciate that. And Patrick Wood, I had known sort of peripherally through his connection with Anthony Sutton. Like he was collaborating with Anthony Sutton towards the end of Anthony Sutton's life. And I think they wrote at least one book together.
Yeah, he seems like the carry-on of Anthony Sutton in a lot of ways, for sure.
Yeah, so the thing that was interesting about the interview was how, because Patrick Wood and Anthony Sutton, these are guys that, like, we have the internet and we're, typing around the internet and stuff like that and trying to unearth certain bits of information, which is getting harder and harder all the time, by the way. Hold on one second.
I was like, was that
that's my new phone ringer. But Anthony Sutton and Patrick Wood, they didn't have the luxury of the internet. They would have to actually go to places.
They did the grunt work.
And they would, root around libraries and get stuff through, FOIA and all that. And so they have a lot of like the original documents and things. Like shipping documents, transport all, stuff where they were able to put things together. I mean, that's how Sutton was able to be so successful. He was able to track all this stuff. Anyway, so because of that, Patrick Wood has been studying this for a very long time, and he knows basically, what's going on, and what's happening has very little to do with politics, and it has everything to do with social engineering. And basically what we're seeing worked out now is this plan that is kind of cybernetically driven and cybernetically based, and that there really is no place for politics in the new world. There will no political solutions.
Definitely no diplomacy.
Well, no diplomacy and no political solutions.
Yeah.
Right? Like once everything is set in order, then it will be virtually impossible to get out of that cage. It's kind of like when you go to call customer service and you get maybe one person, maybe the next person up, and they'll say, sorry, we can't change anything. It's the system, right?
Yeah.
That's been the refrain of customer service for like the last 15 years.
Yeah, longer than that.
20 years ago, you might be able to get somebody and say, okay, well, now they just say the default, we can't change anything, it's the system.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of the extension of all that. Like there would be no change, it's just the system. And these people who are creating this they're bloodless, right?
Yeah.
They're just all bloodless, and everybody's just a widget or a
node.
A node with some form of economic value, right? Someone has more economic value than others, and it's really the extension of the eugenics program in a lot of ways. And what I was talking about was that Patrick Wood is this odd kind of manifestation of the eugenics program, in that his mother was raised in Berkeley, and Berkeley apparently was one of the hotbeds of the eugenics movement.
Yep.
Which doesn't surprise me. And so her mother, like his mother's mother, so his grandmother, right?
Yeah.
They had a boy who was supposedly like slow, retarded, whatever, however you want to frame the kid. So they thought that somehow the next boy would be born defected. So they had to essentially take out or cut his mother's fallopian tubes, right?
Yeah.
Because they did not want. No, okay, I take this back. It was the mother's brother. That's what it was.
Okay.
It was the mother's brother who had some birth defect. And then they said, okay, well, this skips a generation, which meant that their grandkid, which would have been Patrick Wood, would have been potentially defective, right? Yeah. Well, so they took the girl, his mother, down to LA and snipped her tubes. So she couldn't have a kid. Now, Patrick Wood's mother was pregnant and on a ship coming from Holland. And she gave Patrick Wood up for adoption. And so he winds up being adopted by a woman who was raised by a family who were immersed in eugenics.
Wow.
And this is what he winds up ultimately beginning to wrap his head around. And when I heard that, I was like, man, that is just a mind fuck, that this guy, that everything kind of colludes and collides together so that he would be the person who would ultimately have a front row seat with this experience.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a hot topic of conversation lately, right? So I've been doing this kind of new series with Michael Wan called Project Kids, right? And one of the things that we've sort of been like doing is unwinding our history. Like we'll tell each other our stories and bounce things off and whatnot, right? And so we've talked about how, my mother worked for this company called Psycon that was loosely related to Tavistock that seemed to be doing, drug testing experiments, and things like that would basically describe the situation that I found myself in with certain things, right? And there may have been some other interesting things going on with genetic testing and things like that too, right? So then I end up doing this. Michael Wan's mother worked as a secretary for a guy at Edgewood Arsenal who was doing the LSD experiments there. Right? And then there's another guy that I've had on my show named John Brisson, whose, mother was in an experimental program at University of North Carolina, where all this COVID crap is going on, an experimental trial for, I think having something, I can't remember what the trial was, but then later she ended up having lupus. He ended up having all sorts of funny health issues and whatnot. And he lost the son to some of the same health issues that then led him to solve his problems by becoming a gut health expert, right? So we're all here, Patrick, myself, Michael Wan, John Brisson, we're all here sort of, ratting out the program that we come from.
What's interesting is that the three of you, came through the chute, right? Like, so you have a biological connection with your three birth mothers. He does not, right?
Even more interesting.
And I don't think it was part of some program or anything.
Yeah.
But what it says to me though, is that the universe is really wickedly smart, right?
I think that goes for all of us. It's a different thing for him, but I think that is sort of the cosmic giggle here, right?
Yeah.
That you can do this. You can do this shit, and it's gonna, you know what I mean? And it's not gonna take.
So you're gonna practice eugenics,
yeah,
and then you're gonna cut off the potential for your daughter to actually have a child. But in the meantime, nature abhors a vacuum, and look what it sucks in. Yep. The guy who could take down the technocracy, right? I mean, it's like it really gives me a lot of hope in a lot of ways.
Yeah, one of the things I like about both Anthony Sutton and Patrick Wood, though, is like their work is the kind that like would be harder for someone like my father to really argue with. The way they present their material is very intellectual. You know what I mean? Very like resource heavy and document heavy, and like really just spilling it out in this, like in a very researched way, as opposed to like, the way a lot of people who present conspiratorial material lay it out, right? Like they have intellect in mind when they're doing their work, right?
Again, that gets back to looking at, the troop movements and the shipping lists and all the stuff that he would use to create a very solid case that the United States or businesses within the United States were colluding with both the Russians and the Germans
Yeah.
to build up both the Third Reich and the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
And because he has the paperwork, it clearly shows all this stuff. And Sutton's delivery is just, I think, classic. You know, he's got that kind of very cool, very clipped sort of British delivery. The thing that I found really interesting about him is that towards the end, he starts hanging out with Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Like, to me, it's such a trip because you know who she is by any chance? Okay, so Elizabeth Clare Prophet, there was this guy by the name of Mark Prophet. And Mark Prophet supposedly went to Mount Shasta and was taken into the mountain and met with the Great White Brotherhood inside of Mount Shasta. Okay, so he was then essentially, given the role of being the recipient of what they call the 7 rays. Mm-hmm. So he would communicate with the ascended masters.
Yeah.
So this was Mark Prophet, and then he winds up marrying this woman named Elizabeth Clare. And so she becomes Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and they're the twin flames right together. Well, eventually he passes away, and I think he passed away, he wasn't that old. So now she takes over this, 7-ray ministry. And during the 80s, she was incredibly popular, really, really popular. The whole I Am thing was really, really popular. I remember going to the Whole Life Expo in San Francisco circa 1985 or 86. I think it might have been 86. And she was there and she was giving a talk, and man, the hall was packed.
Yeah.
So she would channel the Ascended Masters. And then eventually she decided that she wanted to, get more remote. So they started a compound in Montana. Mm-hmm. And so she was getting these messages that the end of the world was coming, right? So, but before it got really crazy, her daughter wrote a book about this, but before it got really crazy, she would bring Anthony Sutton up there and interview him. And it was like about as far away from Stanford and academia as you could get. And she asked great questions, and he was an Aquarian. So it wasn't like it was a weird thing for him. I think he actually kind of liked being.
He likes it. Yeah.
But Sutton's the man. The interview with Patrick Wood and Spiros is really good. And it's hard to find now over on YouTube. They took it down 2 days after.
So was there, you and I understand the deeper reasons for this, but what do you think the obvious reason they would point to as to why they would take it down?
Well, I think some of it might have to do with touching on, Corona or COVID-19.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, I think Spiro is probably a prime target to lose his channel on YouTube.
I'm sure.
I think that's, they just keep going down the pecking order, right? Yep. So I think he's like close. I mean, you look at his subscriber list; it's pretty good. I mean, he's got a large number of subscribers. He's got about 300,000 people as subscribers.
Got a lot of subscribers, and he's like you said, he's a very kind of straightforward, clear presenter. Like he hasn't. I think the people who are sort of on the chopping block, like you and I, are a little woo-woo and a little out there, right? So like it's almost like in a certain way, like we've kept ourselves safe by sort of discrediting ourselves by talking about things that are considered off the regular dinner table, right? Spiro hasn't really done that. He's really stayed much more into what's really going on in the political landscape or the health landscape. He doesn't go off into some of the super fringe territory that you and I go into. And so I think, he's one of those people who, like a person who wants to write off conspiracy, could find his channel, and depending on what they landed on, might feel like this person sounds, reasonable, and start down a wake-up process where they'll eventually find their way to the shit you and I say. But he's dangerous because he walks that line between alternative and slightly more mainstream alternative, right? And he's there's just not a lot to pick at about him, right? So he's more dangerous, you know?
Yeah, I think he's very credible. You know,
Yep.
he's very credible. He doesn't come off like somebody who's crazy or nuts or anything like that. So I would think that he would probably be very close to being in the crosshairs
Yeah.
in terms of information. Yeah,
What, I've heard you a couple times, but I never, like, this week's been crazy because I've been taking this class and doing some other stuff. I haven't gotten to listen to as much stuff as I usually do. But I know that you've been talking quite a bit about Stefan Molyneux and the fact that he lost his channel. Like, do we have, like, any given reason? I know it's not going to be the real reason, but do we have any given reason what it was? And then what is it that you think it is? Since we're talking about people who lose their channels.
So, Molyneux, I saw an interview with him, and it was a pretty good interview. And I was actually quite impressed with him in a way. Like, he's one of those guys that he's always glib, very smart, very intellectual, self-deprecating, funny, very philosophical.
Very philosophical.
And he's easy to listen to. He makes really good arguments. Would find with him at times that I wish he would just kind of punch through that wall a little bit more in some ways. But so it's not like I haven't enjoyed. And by the way, he was on YouTube really early on.
Early on. He's been around
really
forever.
early on. And I remember watching something by him about the free range society. And I thought, this guy's really sharp. You know, he's got some good stuff going on. And he's had, I mean, the amount of videos he's put up was staggering.
Yep.
I mean, I think he did something along the lines of 100,000 videos. I mean, it was really big. It was a big number, right? Big, because he's been doing this since 2009, roughly.
Yeah, he was early on.
So that's 11 years worth of.
He was really
content.
the first big libertarian on YouTube.
Yeah, it's 11 years worth of content. So he did this interview, and he was very impressive in this interview, and made some great arguments against government, which you would really enjoy, by the way.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end of the interview, he's still not sure why he got kicked off of YouTube. Like, they just said, you're done. Now, he did make an address, a public address somewhere. I think it was at the EU. I think it might have been in Belgium, maybe, or Switzerland, Belgium or Switzerland. He made an address at the EU, and he talked about censorship.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been it. Like, it may not have had anything to do with his content. I think somebody at a higher level kind of finally peeked over and said, who is this guy?
Yeah.
And said, you know, got on the phone with, looked him up, and then got on the phone with YouTube and said, get rid of the channel.
Interesting. Yeah, I used to listen to him a bit more. And then he got on the Trump train, which to me, like, because he's always been a libertarian. He's always been for, a voluntary society. But then he kind of got on the Trump train. So that kind of, I wasn't too interested in that. And then he started talking a lot about race. And he talked about it from a very intellectual standpoint, right? It was very intellectual. It was not racist in nature, but he talked about the differences between the races in terms of IQ and this, that. And he was like on that trip for a really long time, and I got bored of listening to him. You know what I mean? The topic is just not that interesting to me. But he has said a lot of things about race that for a person who's intellectual and understands what he's talking about, you understand what he's talking about. But somebody who's not, or who is looking to call somebody a racist because, they disagree with their other points or because they're smart or whatever, like, there is that content still out there. I don't think he's been talking about that so much recently. I think he's gone back to his more libertarian roots after sort of, being on the Trump train for a bit and whatnot. But yeah, he definitely, it's too bad because he definitely is unique. You know what I mean? He has a unique combination of things he talks about and ways he talks about them. And it's a lot harder to poke holes in his arguments than a lot of other people who might be making similar arguments, on their channels, but aren't as smart as him. And so they can leave those channels up because eventually the mob will be able to poke a hole in their story. But it's a lot harder to poke one in his.
Yeah, well, I think they're just going to start it to, and by the way, they axed his Twitter as well. It wasn't just YouTube.
Yeah, they always do it in concert, right?
So it was kind of a summary decision, right?
Yeah.
It was just gone. And, but I don't know. I actually think he'll be better outside of YouTube for some reason in his channel.
Yeah.
Like, you know, now astrologically he's an Aquarius, and next year, you know, starting next year, it's going to be a really good year for a lot of Aquarians. So he should do quite well, and maybe even, you know, liberated from sort of the ghetto of YouTube in some ways. Not that it's a ghetto, but you know, there's a lot of competing voices inside of YouTube.
It kind of is a ghetto. I mean, I remember for whatever he's turned into, that's a kind of a disaster. I remember Matt Drudge being on the Alex Jones show, warning people to get out of the ghettos of social media, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're going to come level the buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And so you just look at like who's next on the pecking order, right? Who's going to just get yanked one day and not have any reason why that they've been yanked. I'm interested in the longevity of the Amazing Polly. Right, like how long will the Amazing Polly continue to be the Amazing Polly? And look, I think she does stellar research. And by the way, if you say, you know, a slightly negative word about the Amazing Polly, you will feel some heat coming at you, right? Which people have. And I just have to be honest, right? There's something about Polly that does not click for me. So I'm just being honest.
So this is, I've been talking about this a couple, without so much naming names although I have named hers before, with a couple of people, with John Brisson on the air, with Nish and whatever, about there's this group of presenters that came along at a certain point that they have really well put together productions, right? They have like hypnotic kind of sounding voice and way of speaking, and they've basically just synthesized or like mixed together in a way that's entertaining and easy to digest the same research that other people spent years trying to put together and did the original research on. And I've heard Amazing Polly credit somebody before, some others I don't hear, you know, but there's a couple, and some of these people do good work. So this is not me fully knocking them. It's like people like Really Graceful, Amazing Polly. I can think of like a couple of others, right? And, you know, these people are all people that, like, I'm not even saying that they talk about Q, but they rose during that same period of time that all the people who do nothing but talk about Q rose during, almost like, you know, they knew that there was going to be some people that didn't quite bite on the Q nugget. And so there needed to be an alternative that wasn't quite as stupid, but also was sort of prepackaged and whatever, you know. So people sometimes think, oh, you're knocking on this person, you don't know what you're talking about. But for some reason, with some of those people, my spidey sense goes up, right? That like there's just something that is too smooth about this, right? And that like the rise, like you and I both know people who are amazing presenters and amazing researchers who've been around for, you know, way longer than even you and I have, who like still, you've been around forever, Robert, and you're like have what, 6,000 subscribers? You know what I mean? And Some of these people show up and overnight are over 300,000, 400,000 subscribers, and something has to be helping them, right? It just doesn't make sense. I think there's some truth to that. And, you know, not that Polly needs me to defend her, but she, you know, some of her videos they're excellent. Like the one she did on torture and the Chinese stuff and going through making the connections between the peace group. I know what you're talking. I mean, Amnesty International.
Amnesty International. It was like that to me was fantastic.
Yep.
Like that really solidified and you know what was interesting too though is I had just done a show about the Manchurian Candidate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I was talking about how people are being essentially turned into Manchurian candidates, mm-hmm. and using these ideas around, you know, kind of, you know, Chinese torture. And I brought up Lawrence Harvey and Domino Harvey. So I was like playing around with the, you know, the idea from this kind of psychic level, right?
Yep.
And then a few days later, about a week later, she comes up with this thing on torture.
Yep.
which is what I'm not saying she watched my show or anything, but the way she put it together was great and was all laid out. So, you know, that actually, I think, gave people real insight into what's going on in real service. And at the same time, there's still something that I don't click with.
Nope.
There.
I can't, none of that stuff works for me. You know what I mean? Like I'll peep it once in a while just to like monitor it. But the other thing is like some of the voice of some of these. So Nish and I were talking about it as like when they, like the auto-tune version of like podcasts or YouTube presentations. Right? Like, you know, there's not any like raw, like undergroundness to it. It's all very packaged. It's like going to a chain restaurant as opposed to going to a mom and pop, right? Like there's just, it's all slick, it's all organized or whatever. And this is nothing like even against them. Like this is a different generation of people. They're younger than us, right? And like,
well, I don't know about Polly.
I don't know how much.
I don't know her age. She strikes me maybe being in her 40s, like early
okay,
40s.
so maybe she's about my age, but you know, some of the others are like in their
really graceful is definitely
younger, right? And they've been raised on a different kind of diet informationally than you and I have. They've been raised on the different the ways music sounds, the different, you know. And Nish had a point that like these new content creators, whether they be musicians, artists, or in the YouTube world or whatever, this is the first generation of over-immunized children reaching adulthood, right? Over-immunized children, people have on soy formula, all of that kind of stuff. And you know what I mean? And it's just a different, it's just different. It's like, I don't like the big like festivals and stuff like that. I like the underground warehouse parties. I'm from a different generation when it comes to like the music scene, right? Like you are too. I don't like the new way they do it. It's not for me. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, I mean, so what you're getting into now are things like environmental factors and how people are tweaked and shaped and raised in ways that in other generations they just haven't been, right? They're just they're almost a different species. And
like the difference between analog and digital.
Yeah. Oh, you ever go to Winter Watch, Russ Winter's site? You ever go over there?
No, I've never heard of him.
So it's you know, there's a whole kind of like, you know, there's the alt-right, right? And then you've got like, you know, the stormtrooper world, Stormfront. And then you've got this space that's kind of in between.
Okay.
And it's like Tacky Mag, where that's where Gavin McInnes hangs out.
Yeah.
Jim Goat and Coulter writes for Tacky Mag every now and then.
Okay.
So, and then Russ Winter kind of occupies that space between like Stormfront and then the alt-right or the dark intellectual web. So these are people that talk about things in ways that might make people uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't talk about them in ways that would be considered, you know, fascistic or, you know, Aryan or, you know, it's a very, you know, kind of straight edge sort of world.
Yeah.
Anyway, Russ Winter and this other guy, he does this show, this guy Eric Tradcat. Anyway, they were talking about, you know, violence in the Black community. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, why are young Black males, you know, not every young Black male, but why is there a preponderance of young, violent Black males? And so then they broke some stuff down, which is really interesting, right? And it's not just the fact that, you know, they happen to be this group or this race, this ethnicity, but they get down and break down like drug use happens at an early age.
Yep.
You know, that they're getting high. Yeah. They're getting high, 9, 10 years old, right? The brain is not forming.
Nope.
Along the way that a brain needs to form. Okay.
Yeah.
Then it's another group that probably is getting immunized up the wazoo, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Immunization. You've got you know, early access to drugs, which is inhibiting brain formation. Then you have this, right?
Yep.
Then all these other things that contribute to the formation of this kind of new group, right? Yeah. You know, and I got to tell you, you know, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and, you know, every group had their issues, and there were certain edges to every group, right?
Yeah.
Certain edges to every group. But I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen anything like this. This is like completely new territory. I mean, there was a story that came out of Chicago a couple days ago. It was a group of about 10 kids ranging from the age of 10 to about 15. And they're using guns and they're carjacking.
Yeah.
And it's like, that stuff just did not happen. That shit didn't happen. And this goes beyond even that group, right? Like, let's go out to Portland, you know, and let's look at the Antifa protesters and, you know, some of these, you know, quote unquote soy boys that are out there. It's a whole different, I mean, again, there are these influences that are creating like a whole different species.
Yep.
And they're out there, and the next thing you know, things get weird or things get rough, and they turn into like a Rick and Morty cartoon.
Yep.
And it's like, well, why is that? Well, it's because, again, immunizations, cell phones, they have their own different yet specific kind of social parameters, right?
And I think your point about the drugs is really good. I think, you know, like, I think the only reason that I didn't suffer a great deal of permanent damage from all my years of drug use is because they started late. Like, I didn't even try a drug till I was like 19 or 20. And then I had a quick little grow around with it then, and then didn't really pick back up until my mid to late 20s. And then that was kind of when the more heavy drug use happened for me. So my brain was pretty well formed, and I had an understanding of what was me and what was not me, right? But my stepbrother, he started doing drugs when he was like probably 10 or 11. And by the time he was in junior high school, he was at periods of time eating acid every day at school. And you'd see him do things like, all of a sudden, and you'd be like, what, Mark? And he'd be like, there were birds. And there was no birds, right? Like, he was literally reacting to something that wasn't there.
Right.
And, you know, he ended up dying. He ended up getting shot in the head at a party, and the same kind of violence that a lot of these kids in inner cities get into, right? There's something, the drug use, so he died when he was 21, and his brain was damaged from drugs, for sure, right? For sure. And he died in the same, you know, the same way that a lot of these kids do, in, you know, gang people shooting each other and stuff like that, right? But I think your point about the drugs is good. That, you know what I mean? That, like, there's something, you know, when kids are using that young, right? Like, the brain just doesn't form right. And then you add into it now that we live in frequency soup and we have crap food, you know, and they listen to crap music. Everything is crap, crap, crap all day long, right? And the other thing is, a lot of the marijuana these days that people smoke is treated with sound, right? And it is changing the chemical molecular structure of it. This is a completely different kind of marijuana.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know,
sound is
it's very hard to get
great mind controller.
It's very hard to get heirloom seeds too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
no, I don't smoke, you know.
Neither do I. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I did. And when the first time I got high, it was, you know, it was Disneyland. It was great. And that was with just a regular bag of Mexican dirtweed, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't even begin to think about being 10 years old and getting high on today's just, you know, thunderfuck mind weed. I just, it would blow my mind. And then very quickly, very rapidly, you know, it would go into places like bath salts and stuff like that too, right?
Bath salts, and then you have drugs like meth that are literally programmed at this point. Like, I'm telling you right now, the first place that they experimented with like a lot of the nanotechnology and the smart dust was in the meth, because just like HIV, like what they did with the gay community and HIV, that's a throwaway community that nobody cared about. Same with the meth community and all the things. Like, literally, if you go and research things that people on meth report and things that people are targeted individuals report, they are one-to-one the same thing. And they knew that you know, I used meth before it got like that, and then after, and there was a change. It went from being analog feeling to being digital feeling, and that was a population that A, no one cared about, and B, nobody would believe. They'd think that they were experiencing paranoia just based on the drugs. But I'm telling you, all the things that people now report as targeted individual symptoms and things like that, I first heard from people, you know, in, you know, drug use rings, right? And so, like, that kind of stuff is in the drugs. They have designer drugs that they treat with sound. They program things in. Dude, I'm sure they put fucking spells on them. And there's so many things going on with this.
Right.
One of the biggest things is sound. Like sound is the great mind controller. As we delve further and you're having Mark Devlin on your show, I know tomorrow. He's my good friend. He and I have a show coming up in a couple of weeks. But, you know, there's a person you can talk about sound and mind control with. And this goes not just for people being on drugs when they're listening to music, but the drugs are now actually treated with sound.
Yeah, I think that's been going on for a while. I mean, even back when I was in high school, you know, we were getting theoretically stuff that was sprayed with paraquat, right? Like they would go into the growing fields in Colombia, and they would fly over the growing fields in Colombia, and then they would start to spray paraquat over the, you know, over the cannabis, and then that eventually would wind up back into the U.S. And, you know, I could definitely, you know, tell a difference. So my relationship with that stuff was just eroding very, very quickly. Yeah. But, you know, I think the takeaway from all of this is that, you know, we're living on a planet now where we're seeing, I don't even want to call it evolution, but we're seeing this species mutation take place.
Yeah.
Like it's
mutation. It's not evolution. It is mutation.
No, there's a major mutation going on, and the mutation is happening at such a rate that people won't be able to really communicate and have a meaningful interaction with the byproduct of the mutation that's taking place. Because we'll be operating at two different frequencies. We'll have very different reference points.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you know, it's a little troubling in some ways.
Yeah, very troubling.
It's very troubling. Yeah. And I don't think it's without some intent, right? There's certainly some intent. And I forget who it was that I was watching. They were talking about vaccines. And why is there a preponderance of children feeling like they want to be one sex versus another, right?
Okay. So yeah, I have my experience. Yeah.
So what's really going on with the vaccines? What are they really putting in the vaccines?
Yeah. So this is, you know, I don't know how much you've listened to various people who've talked about projects and programs. Like White Wolf Van Atzigen used to talk about some things related to this. And then I don't know if you know who Carolyn Dean is, but her husband is Bob Dobbs or Bob Neverett, who used to be an MK Ultra programmer, right? And at some point in some of her health stuff, she started talking about how in a certain year, they started putting things in the vaccines that were then, you know, I think partly markers for people in sort of projects, programs, and then I think it became more widespread. And one of the things that, like, I've talked about it a little bit on various things I've done, but I was talking about it with Dr. Keysbury today, right? So I think that, you know, we're in a place right now evolutionarily, I don't know if it's just like where the planets are, right? Or what's going on, but where people are starting to, there's obviously an awakening. And part of that awakening was sort of androgynous in nature, not in terms of our physical bodies, but in terms of like people becoming more aware that they needed to balance their masculine and feminine characteristics, or at least become aware of them and begin to work with them, right? People like you who do the things that you do, right? Like, you know, you're a guy's guy, you like sports and all that kind of stuff, but you're into this astrology and you can really talk about, you know, certain things that are much more sort of feeling in nature and whatnot. Like this is a big time for that. And there's a high spiritual sort of place, and you know, androgyny can be that like sort of high, when you have a person who's really balanced, that's a powerful person. And I think they saw this coming, right? And they know that one of the weaknesses that humans have is the tendency to externalize, right? And so they wanted, when this came, they wanted people to think that this was about their outward gender and their presented sex, rather than about like becoming wise in both the masculine and feminine way, right? And so they started putting soy in the food, right? They started putting chemicals and things like that, and then just also bombarding us with ugly art, ugly, weird kind of social stuff, to weird pop stars and things like that, to create this confusion. Right. And now people think it really is about, like, I have lots of masculine energy. That to me, it doesn't translate into, I think I should go be a boy. Right.
Right.
It has. I like a lot of girl stuff. I like getting my nails done. I like wearing makeup or whatever. But I also have a very strong, I like certain, like, man smells, like leather and cigar and whiskey. And, I like that, I like that stuff. And I have some of that energy and whatnot. And for me, it just is like, I put it into like a creative place, or I play with scents or whatever. And it takes care of that need for me. And I find it, it's part of what makes my mind interesting. And part of what makes your mind interesting is this balance. And I think they don't want that. A person who's got that shit in balance is a powerful person who's not going to fall for the bullshit. But if you have a person who's like wandering around taking chemicals and hormones and all this kind of stuff and mutilating their body and whatever, the last thing they're worried about is whether their, the kind of rights that matter are being taken away.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is integration.
Yeah.
And they don't want integrated people. They want disintegrated people.
Absolutely.
Because disintegrated people don't know who the fuck they are. Yeah. And then they can just be led around by a trend or a signal or whatever. Right?
The same thing that's going on. I was listening to Joe Rogan actually had someone on that was really good last week named Abigail Schreier, who wrote a book about the epidemic going on with young teenage females who are wanting to switch to male, and how it's been like a trend at the schools. In the same way that like anorexia or cutting has been trends, it spreads like a mind virus, right? Like one person who's considered kind of cool and edgy does it, and then all the other ones are doing it. And, like they're causing permanent damage and harm to themselves, and they're not doing well, right? In the same way you saw like in the 80s and 90s with anorexia, and then 10 years ago with cutting. Yeah.
Well, that's been going on for a while.
Yeah.
And, I was friends with a fellow.
I remember. Yeah.
Right. Chris from Minnesota.
Yeah.
And his daughter was, dead set that she was going to be a he, right? She was confused and was headed towards hedom. And eventually what happened is that, high school ended.
Mm-hmm.
And the influences around high school ended. And she got a boyfriend, and, she lost all interest in transitioning. I mean, so that flux period of adolescence is a really, really tricky time.
Yeah.
It's a really tricky time. And they have had their hooks in adolescence for a long time.
Yep.
Long time. They really started to get, when I say they, we're talking about people like CIA, Langley, MI6, Tavistock, right? These are the people, that put these, universities, think tanks, that put these programs together, and they decide that for whatever reason, they're going to go in, they're going to target, they're going to groom, and whatever that thing is, right? Whatever that thing is, that's what then they've had their hooks in adolescence since the 1950s.
So a lot of this, and I was not surprised when I heard this, right? I listened to an excellent, and actually this can in some ways tie us into some of our main topics tonight. I listened to an excellent interview about a year ago from a guy named Benjamin Boyce, who came up by reporting on the Weinstein situation at Evergreen, right? Because he, not during the period of time that the Evergreen thing happened, but before that, had been a student of Brett Weinstein and Heather Heying, and he just started reporting on all this stuff because he'd had a good learning experience with them. He knew what people were accusing them of was not true, at least in that case, what was going on there. And he started reporting on the social phenomenon of all this woke culture. And it led him to a huge awakening. And he does great work. I mean, totally separate stuff than them now. But he had on a mother of a person, very much like your friend Chris, a mother of a person who was going through this with her child. And she said that all of this started for her kid, and then other people have followed up with research on this. All of this started for her kid when her kid met someone at school who was doing it, and then they started hanging out on two particular websites, Tumblr and DeviantArt. And when I heard that, I was like, okay, everything I ever thought about DeviantArt was correct, because I went through something with DeviantArt that was changing my mind, right? I went through, Randy and I used to talk about this, but I got to a place where they had some kind of like AI software, predictive software running through DeviantArt much before a lot of other things online did, right? Because I would have this thing happen to me where I'd go to a party, I'd close my eyes and dance and, you know, whatever, have my visuals from psychedelics or whatever. And I'd be like seeing cool stuff, and I wanted to find things that looked like it. So I'd go home and I'd go on this website called DeviantArt, right? And I would fucking find shit that looked exactly like what I had seen behind my eyes. And that shit would have been posted while I was at the party, right? And then I would continue looking. I'd sometimes spend hours when I got home from parties looking at this sort of psychedelic art. And I'd have things happen like in my head, for some reason, I'd think of a term, right? And then the next piece of art that scrolled up on the thing would be the term that just went through my head. It would be named the term, even if it had nothing to do with it. It could be like some sort of psychedelic design or fractal or whatever. I looked at a lot of fractals, sacred geometry, mandalas, and it would have a term attached to it like cold fusion or cat scratch or whatever, something that went through my mind, and within minutes it would come up as the title of a piece of art, right? So there's something going on with like...
Well, so, you know, I had Eric Carlstrom on my show on Friday.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he brought up was the fact that, you know, we are essentially cameras.
Yeah.
That this technology
Yep.
is already inside of us.
It's in our eyes, it's in our pineal, it's in our mind.
And essentially what it's doing is it's
Yep.
throwing signals back.
Yep. You got it.
Right?
He's great.
To a super mainframe computer.
Yep.
So that it wouldn't be all that difficult for that high strange or synchronicity
Yep.
to happen if that wiring was already inside of you, right?
Yeah, but I think there's particular websites that were active in this space before others.
Probably still, probably still are too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. Definitely see that. And yeah, so we're dealing with a mutational situation, and I think that's why it's very hard for people to wrap their heads around this idea of a rational discourse or rational solution. And even now, when people are wearing masks all the time, like, you know, what sort of mutations are taking place inside of that individual psychologically,
Yep.
physiologically, biologically, you know, and we're just in a very, very weird time.
Look out for a huge rise in cancer because of lack of oxygen in the blood. That's going to give rise to.
Well, I think what they're going to do is you're going to get a rise of cases of pneumonia.
Now, that too, yeah.
And then that'll pass for the next level of
COVID.
This Corona BS. You ever watch that guy, A Plain Truth? You ever watch his channel?
Yeah, Jamie Lee, for sure.
He had a little 2-minute clip today, and I thought about this, but I hadn't taken it as far as he did. But his thought or his concept is that the test is the vaccine.
I will not take a test. So this is the whole, like, I will not take a test, right? If I for some reason ever did or had to, I would only do one where I spit onto something. I would never put it in my mouth or in my nothing. I'm not touching it, right? Like, right. They already have our DNA from a million other things. So just me spitting on something is not going to do anything to me. But no one's putting shit in my mouth. No one's touching me. And I 100% agree with you. And do you know who Kelly from Vegas is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she sends me a lot of emails. She's got a pretty.
She likes to chat a lot.
She likes to chat. Yeah. And she's, she has interesting things to say. And she was talking about that there's effects from the future when people have taken the vaccine already, like precognitively affecting people's behavior. But this is like a different take on that. Maybe it's the reason it's happening is because people have, all these COVID. Think about how much crazier, like in the last 3 weeks, the mask Nancy's have been, right? The mask Nazis and whatever, like they've been fucking crazy. Right? They weren't that crazy in the beginning, and now they're like.
Well, because there's a cumulative effect of breathing in all that CO2 all the time.
I mean, there's all that, but it could also be it could be a combination of these things. But I mean, people are not. you know, whenever, I know that we've gone through this lovely phase of nobody dies from anything but coronavirus anymore because no one goes to the hospital. But at a certain point, people's health are going to start failing in lots of other ways because of the fact that they have not been, you know, breathing oxygen, right? They've been breathing their own recirculated CO2. And, you know, people who are out there exercising with a mask on are nuts. They're destroying their health. They're not helping.
Yeah, I read this story where this doctor, some doctor, ran 22 miles with a mask on just to prove how healthy it is. Right, 22 is an interesting number in of
right?
Itself, you know, but really you ran 22 miles in a stupid fucking mask
just
to prove that oxygen is not that big a fucking deal. Really? I mean, get a life, man. And so it's
so this whole, but that would make, I mean, Jamie's great on a lot of things, you know, plain truth, but that would make lots of sense. Like the distraction is everybody arguing over which vaccine it's going to be. Is one going to come in time? Is it going to be mandatory? Blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, everybody's running out to get a free COVID. I mean, Laura got a text today from Texas because she used to live there, right? First offering her to come get a free test, and then when she didn't text back immediately, like within 2 minutes, they then called her to offer her a free COVID test. And you want to know what, something hilarious? You know where they were offering the COVID tests? Liberty Hill.
well, I know where that is. Yeah. Liberty Hill. I know where that is. Interesting. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I run out of words sometimes to describe what's happening.
Right? Yeah.
Because it really is just a complete and utter freak show of just epic proportions. I had a slight meltdown. I think it was yesterday. I had a bit of a meltdown yesterday.
Yeah.
When I went to the Ace Hardware, and just again, I'm the only guy in town that's really not wearing a mask. I mean, I know there are other people. I just don't pass them. I don't cross my path. But it's just. I hit that moment. I hit that wall. It was like the Twilight Zone.
Yep.
And I could see why in some ways that people would want to wear a mask because they don't want to be that guy, right? They don't want to be the guy that stands out. They don't want to be the guy that has a very kind of surreal moment.
Yeah.
Because they may not be able to handle it, process that.
Yeah.
Because I actually think that people's ability to process most things is pretty limited.
I agree.
You know, which is unfortunate. You know, and I have a lot of love for the human species in a lot of ways, but I just think that the ability to process is just very, very limited.
I agree, and that's been done intentionally too.
Yeah.
People have been very stunted in their ability to sort of integrate the experiences that they've had and move forward. Right?
Yeah, and so to think that we could all we could all be in this together is just ridiculous.
There's nothing that's more annoying to me than when people say that shit. We're all in this together. Yeah.
We're all in this together.
Yeah. Be together apart, right? Together at home. I was like, what the fuck, dude? All right, should we move from the appetizers to the main course?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So where do you want to start? Timmy Boy or the Weinstein Brothers?
Why don't we talk about the Weinsteins?
All right. Well, first of all, I'll let you know because I've heard them correct people many times. It's Weinstein. They're Weinstein. Okay. They're not Weinsteins. They're Weinsteins.
Weinsteins.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike the other guys who are the Weinsteins, they don't want to be.
He says Harvey is Weinstein. We are Weinstein.
Right. They've got to completely wash their hands.
Right. So
socially distance from those guys.
So as we walk ourselves into this discussion on the Weinstein brothers, I think that I've been probably paying close attention to them like longer maybe than you have. And so I will remind people that the way we were introduced to the Weinstein brothers was during the simulation sputtering of the Harvey, right? So what happened is within just a few weeks, we had the Harvest Festival shooting, the Hurricane Harvey and the Harvey Weinstein, sex scandal. And then just barely after the Harvey Weinstein sex scandal, we had the Brett Weinstein incident at Evergreen, right? And one of the other weird things about the Brett Weinstein instance at Evergreen is that his wife's name is Heather Haying, right? Well,
Heather Hayer.
Heather Hayer, right? Heather Hayer, yes. But Heather Hay, so okay, But just not that long before that, we'd had the Charlottesville event where the girl who got hit by the car, and which was also a racial event, just like a little different, but the Brett Weinstein's event was a racial event. The girl who got hit by the car and supposedly killed by the alt-right Nazi was Heather Haying. So one was Heather Haying and one was Heather Heyer. So we're having a lot of that strange wordplay that happens around a lot of these staged events. If anybody remembers, we had a Hurricane Sandy and a Sandy Hook right at the same time. And then Sandy Hook reference in the Batman movie, and we had a Batman shooter. So these events are often connected by wordplay. You know, our friend Oli Damagard would notice that as well. And of course, Michael Wan talks about the similarity in words in his synchronistic work and whatnot. But that's the way we were introduced to Brett Weinstein. And of course, Brett Weinstein was, you know, the center of some, you know, basically Black Lives Matter movement on his campus that went really haywire. And then sort of on his event coattails, his brother Eric rode right in. And Eric is one of the most disturbing characters I've ever seen. But let's get into the Weinstein brothers now that we remember how we met them. Weinstein.
Yeah, so I started to pay a bit more attention to them just recently because Brett Weinstein has been making the rounds with this kind of new political model.
The Darkhorse.
Yeah, the Darkhorse.
Right.
Which is interesting because the Darkhorse, you know, the Blackhorse is one of the horses of the apocalypse.
I had that thought earlier today. Yes. Okay. We can't
and
see what, Robert.
The Blackhorse is associated with famine.
Robert, we've lost half of your face. You're too far.
Sorry.
Back. I can't see you. Yes.
That happened with Mr. Radiant Creator, Craig.
Okay, there we go.
So the dark horse is the black horse, which represents famine. Mm-hmm. And the four horses of the apocalypse. So, you know, I've heard about his this idea of like rotating and doing this and that, and you know, on the one hand, it sounded kind of remotely interesting. And then on the other hand, I'm like, well, what are they really doing here? What are they really proposing? Who are these people? And and we've talked about them before, and we've kind of gone down that path before. But it was the Weinsteins that kind of grabbed my attention, and it was this whole idea around Gemini, right? With the brothers, you know, they're two brothers. You know, we're in the true node in Gemini right now. And then there's sort of the dark mirror of them with the other guys who have the same spelling but a different name.
Who's that?
Well, the Weinsteins, right? The Weinsteins and the Weinsteins, they're both brothers, right? They're both brothers.
Which Weinsteins?
Well, there's Bob and Harvey.
Oh, I didn't know about Bob Weinstein. I just know Harvey.
No, so there are two Weinsteins and two Weinsteins.
Yeah. Is this like a Berenstain? Is this like a Berenstain?
So there's Bob and Harvey, and then Eric and Brett. Mm-hmm. So you've got the two brothers, right? So they're brothers, Gemini.
Yeah.
And then you have two sets of brothers. So it's like double Gemini.
Double Gemini.
And then they have the same last name, but slightly different spelling. Mm-hmm. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Brett Weinstein is if I'm not mistaken, he is a Pisces. Mm-hmm. See if I can find. I have his chart. I think he's a Pisces. And then Harvey Weinstein is also a Pisces.
Interesting.
So there's interesting kind of mirroring going on with this whole scene, right?
And the Weinstein fall came at the same time as the Weinstein rise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
That they kind of have this moment in time where one is descending and the other is ascending. And so I began to kind of think about this a little bit. And I knew about the Evergreen College event. And he was on, Weinstein was on Tucker Carlson a couple of weeks ago.
He was on Tucker Carlson was the first person to air his story when it happened back in 2017 or 2018 or whatever it was.
So the story is that they have this day every day at Evergreen.
Yep. Where
basically it's like, see you later. You can't be here.
Oh, the day of absentia or something.
Yeah, like you're privileged. Take a hike for a day. So he's been a part of this for a while.
No, what it was is it was always the day before where black students didn't come to school to remind the white people what it was like when there was segregation or something like
So
that.
then they flipped it.
And
They said
they wanted to switch it. They wanted it to be that the white students couldn't. So the black students were not coming voluntarily, and then they wanted to force the white students not to come instead. And Brett said, "No, that's racist. I'm not doing that. It's racist and just stupid, and I'm not doing it." And
right.
kicked off this, which is he's right, and it kicked off this whole big thing.
Right. So he's now peeled off and doing this dark intellectual web thing. And so it was an interesting kind of moment. And, you know, I always question if something is staged, right? Is something staged? Was that kind of a staged event in some ways to catapult him? It's because he was really just a professor at Evergreen College, and now he's more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's America. I guess you can still do stuff like that. But that's where my head goes, was like, was that staged, or was he looking for an opportunity to get catapulted out of that situation, much in the same way that Jordan Peterson got catapulted out of his situation?
Yeah.
But, and by the way, it worked really well for Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's when that happened, I paid a lot of close attention to it the obviously, like I've spoken about, like I've been, you know, exposed to all this racial stuff my whole life because of the studies of my father and my sister, right? And so when I saw this happen with a person who's obviously left-leaning, right, and obviously has spent most of his life, you know, pushing the same ideas my sister and my father push, you know what I mean, and believing in the same things. You know, and okay, you know, like this, I thought, okay, this is going to be something I can use to help show my dad and my sister how ridiculous all this was. So I paid a lot of close attention, and it was really crazy what went on there. And, but ultimately the university doubled down, I think, which I think, in my opinion, lends to the idea that now, in hindsight, now that we've got some time away and I've watched what has happened since and how he's behaved and how, if that's really what happened to him, he's like a person who had that happen to them would not come around suggesting that we get Andrew Yang and General McRaven, who presided over the Osama bin Laden staged event, right? Like only a person who's a product of a staged, event would suggest as a leader a person who stages events on a certain level. Like, you know, I hadn't thought about it this way until you started talking about it. But, you know, basically Evergreen just stayed the course with what they believed, and their enrollment has dropped and they don't care. And I think our government's going to go for the same thing. They don't care if people don't like what's going to happen or if it ends up actually like costing people money. And this is not that. This is a social engineering plan, not a political or an economic plan, right? Like it's a social engineering plan. And that's what that was there. It was the trial run in the same way that the USA Gymnastics was the thing with Larry Nassar was the trial run for the Epstein shit. Yeah, it's like, it's that kind of thing. And it happened, why does all this bullshit happen in the Northwest, right? One of my questions would be, do they have 5G? When did they turn 5G on in Olympia, Washington? Right?
I have no idea. You know, I lived there a long time ago, and it was a very different place than it is now. But
because
I don't know. I know, you know, he's making lemonade out of lemons, right? But again, if that event doesn't happen, he really is not catapulted.
But
into the public.
My
view,
problem
right?
with 5G is you have a small campus, an enclosed campus, right? And I don't think that like the whole thing was staged in terms of everybody there was an actor. But I think they set up the situation, right? And then if you have a 5G tower and you crank it up that week and people, you know, start acting hysterically, it's a hybrid event, right? Where like some people know it's bullshit and the others are, you know, fully engaged and acting emotionally. And if there's other stimulation, right? Like we've watched them use sound weapons and all kinds of things at protests to make people act crazy. You know what I mean? We've watched all that shit. I had not really thought about it that way until you said it. So I'm sorry I cut you off. I just wanted to finish why I said the thing.
Yeah, no, I think there could be obviously some ambient environmental interference. And maybe that's just how it evolved. But it just again, I just keep thinking he doesn't come to this level of prominence. He doesn't show up on Tucker Carlson. He doesn't reappear on Tucker Carlson. He doesn't become part of sort of this national and even international dialogue without that event really happening. And who knows, maybe it's the same thing or the same principle that took place when Patrick Wood's mother got her fallopian tubes cut, right? It's this chaos, this kind of like fulfillment of a certain type of chaos.
Yeah.
But I've just learned to think along these lines that nothing really, in many cases, not in every case, is truly by accident, right? That there's something very kind of, thought out, blueprinted and planned in many of these scenarios. So I just wanted to bring up, can I share, can I do a share screen?
I think I already gave you ability to share screen.
So I want to bring up a picture of the intellectual dark web so people know who we're talking about here. And then I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is Sam Harris.
Is this a real picture that they made, a real graphic?
It's part of a story on them.
Wow. Okay.
So I believe this is Sam Harris.
No, that's not, that Sam Harris is over here on the second from the right. That's Sam Harris.
That's not Jordan Peterson. That looks like Jordan Peterson.
No, that's Sam Harris.
That guy.
Okay, so this on the right here is Brett Weinstein, Sam Harris. This is
Christina Hoff Summers.
Christina Hoff Summers, Dave Rubin, Joe Rogan,
Heather
Heyer. That's Eric Weinstein, and that I can't fucking tell who that is. That's hard. That one's hard for me to tell. I can't tell who
that's not Jordan Peterson. That looks like Jordan.
No,
Peterson.
that's Sam Harris. I'm
Okay.
100% sure.
All right. So this is your dark intellectual.
So there's some members missing. We're missing Jordan Peterson. We're missing Ben Shapiro. We're missing. There's like one or two other people that I've seen sort of, as part of the main part of the conversation on there. But yeah, these are some of the people that are. Yeah.
So I find this to be
Look,
very
Eric's
odd.
got the black umbrella, dude. Look at that.
It's very odd. He's got a black umbrella, which is the same symbol that got our attention in Minneapolis.
Yep. What do you know about Eric Weinstein?
Not a whole lot, because there's not a lot of background on their parents. And I've searched to find information on their parents. There's a paper that I think it's Brett that states that his grandparents were influenced on him in terms of his intellectual pursuit, but it's very hard to find information on their parents. I know that something is amiss with him, like he's like borderline Asperger's or something. I mean, that's kind of like.
So with Brett?
No, Eric
So Brett has a learning disability and struggled in school until he suddenly became really intelligent and got into Penn, and all this crazy stuff. And now, he has a PhD. Eric was always the smarter one. And Eric is, now he works for Peter Thiel.
Right. He works for Peter Thiel's group. Yeah.
His wife, he's very closely associated with the Heterodox Society, who his wife and Jonathan Haidt founded, right? I think the Heterodox Academy, I think is what it's called, for sort of, against the grain thinkers kind of thing. But Eric, I had never heard of Eric until just a few weeks after this stuff happened with Brett. And suddenly he's making the rounds and he's on Dave Rubin and he's on Joe Rogan, right? And he, to me, is one of the most disturbing characters. I don't know what just happened. Something funny just happened. One of the most disturbing characters I've ever seen. The level of arrogance that this person displays. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. The level of arrogance this person displays, I've never liked him. Like, there was a time when Brett appealed to me. He's really lost me in this last few rounds of media but I always thought he was a nice person. He said some interesting things. I agreed with him. Eric has always rubbed me 100% the wrong way. He thinks he is so damn smart, right? He has this disgusting podcast called The Portal, where he has a lot of these people on, but he also has on people like Barry Weiss and Peter Thiel and whatnot. And, he had James O'Keefe on, right? And this was where I was finally like, this man is the most arrogant man I've ever seen. He has James O'Keefe on, and I'm like, okay, this is great. someone who's says they're a member of the intellectual dark web and says they oppose all this bad stuff going on the left is finally going to ask James O'Keefe, have a conversation with James O'Keefe about the shit from the Bernie Sanders campaign that no one ever talked about, right? No, there's none of that. All Eric is doing is like literally chastising and shaming James O'Keefe for not doing it the way he wants him to do it. And the way he wants him to do it is to not expose the people. Like literally keep everybody's identity secret. Mm-hmm. And the whole literally 3 hours of conversation is him telling James how disappointed he is that he doesn't do it in a way. He's like, we can't share this information with people who have heard Project Veritas is the bad thing because you know, are, essentially, if we were saying it in plain English, you're exposing the people they like, so, or whatever, right? Or he's basically saying, cover up the people's identity and just go after the ideas kind of thing, right? With but just when you listen to it, it was a person basically saying, I think I should have the right to tell you how you should do your job. You and I have wished that James O'Keefe would expose Israel or expose someone on the right so that it would give him credit where we could, in different ways. But I would never think that I could tell him how to do it. Right. And if you, the way I was like, this man is the most arrogant man in the world. And then, this whole bullshit that happened last week with Barry Weiss, resigning from the New York Times, going, wah, 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 they bullied me and they're going to try and cancel me, even though she's engaged in cancel culture her whole career, right? Yeah. She was on the portal, like this whole thing with her is stage 2, right? She was on the portal, and apparently a bunch of times during the interview, she said things like, but I can't say that because of where I work. So then when she quits, he writes this whole thing on Twitter about how proud he is of her, and now she can come on his show again and speak freely. I 100% guarantee to you that what's going to come next from the intellectual dark web is their own sort of media present, their own like network or their own newspaper. Barry Weiss is going to be involved, and you're going to have people who've, these people who've maybe widened the margins about an inch, but that's about it. Never talk about Israel, letting people think that we have this whole new, literally we could see an intellectual dark web political party pop up and completely run in like the 4 horses of the apocalypse and steal the election. They're going to
this is what I was thinking about with them, is that, we deal with a Hegelian dialectic, and there's a problem, a reaction, and a solution. Yeah. And this group seems to be poised to be marketed as a solution.
Yep. 100%. Joe Rogan's got his whole big media thing going on. I guarantee you that Eric and Peter Thiel are going to start something with Barry Weiss or whatever, right? Peter Thiel, and your point about that, how they're going to present this as the new libertarianism, right? It's going to be like, they're going to present it as sort of like a center-left libertarianism kind of thing, but it's going to be a bunch of stupid bullshit that is more it's kind of like when, it's going to be exactly like when, after the Edward Snowden thing went, Glenn Greenwald went with Piero Migliar and started The Intercept that was supposed to be oppositional and maybe is on one topic, and everything else is more fucking establishment bullshit, right? Yeah. This is going to be the same thing as that.
Right? Yeah, that's what it feels like, because if you look at the Libertarian Party, they're just in complete and utter collapse.
Yep.
They're accusing Ron Paul of Russian collusion. So they need to have something replace those kinds of ideas. Mm-hmm. But what's really interesting about the Libertarian Party is, if you follow the roots of the Libertarian Party and the ideas of the Libertarian Party, it comes out of Austria, and this guy named von Mises, right?
Yeah, Ludwig von Mises, yeah.
Yeah, and really what it is, it's really a Jewish intellectual movement. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's a Jewish intellectual movement that's wrapped its head around free market like policies.
Really,
right?
all it does is, this is always my complaint about libertarians, is like, they have all this really good, like, flowery language about, like, being anti-government and about voluntarism and whatever, but they just really care about money, right? Like, been my complaint about most libertarians, and that's why I never classified myself that way, is it's really all about economics, right? It's not actually about true freedom or true liberty.
And by the way, if you're a libertarian, then globalism should be right up your alley.
Yeah.
It should be right up here. Why even have borders? Why have trade deals? Why have tariffs? If you're a real free marketeer, which is what libertarianism is supposed to be about, but ultimately it metastasizes into Godzilla-sized corporatism.
Well, I mean, what you end up with is Peter Thiel, who claims he's a libertarian, but is really a globalist and is going to push all the same crappy socialist policies and stuff like that. It's just, they might be slightly for lifting a little bit of regulation on small business, but just a little bit. You know what I mean? It's going to be, so what do you think the plank of this intellectual dark web / faux libertarian party is going to be? Right? Like they have this idea of running Andrew Yang, right? So I think Brett Weinstein's requirements were that the person be smart, courageous, and a patriot. And the people that he decided met those and just by the way, Eric Weinstein's been pushing, and he also was friends with George Soros and does business with George Soros. They've been pushing Andrew Yang since the very beginning, right? So this is just another iteration of that. But so they've chosen Andrew Yang and General McRaven. So we already discussed General McRaven as having presided over the Osama bin Laden pile of heaping, flaming, dead body in the ocean bullshit in Pakistan, right? And Andrew Yang is so courageous, and that he, when he dropped out after they did all the same kind of crap to him that they did to Tulsi and Bernie and whatever you think of them, right? And then he gets behind Joe Biden. I think somebody is smart, courageous, and a patriot when they back a dementia patient. That's the first thing that pops to my mind is how courageous and patriotic they are when they support a dementia patient that sniffs little girls.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that he has some strong connections with China that probably play a role in that. But here's what I think. I don't think America or Americans would ultimately want a Biden or an AOC style version of communism or socialism. I don't think they want that. But they may want this version. Right? They may want this version. Oh, there we go. Oh, look, Olivia. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Jasper. We have kitty hour here.
Look at her.
Olivia is 90 years old in cat years. She's doing pretty good. All right.
So I think that these guys are being poised for 2024. If somehow this this great reset does not go through, I think that they would be representative of a certain kind of socialism that America would accept. Right?
The synthesis.
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. And I actually even think it could happen sooner than that. I think if things don't go exactly in a particular way over the summer, right? Something like this could ride right into the sunset, right? I mean, I think that, the political system is very well aware that Joe Rogan is the most powerful person in media. It hurts to say that, right? But, I mean, you're right, though. This would be not in my eyes or your eyes, but this would be socialism, or as they like to say, equity, right? Made cool, right? There's something dark and edgy about it, and intellectual. And Sam Harris talks about psychedelics, and Dave Rubin is gay, but sort of Republican-ish now. And each person, they're all slightly edgy in their own way, except for Eric fucking Weinstein, who's just a goddamn tool, right?
Yeah. So there's kind of the hip appeal factor, but I think this is how they're being kind of marketed.
Yeah.
And that they would be the solution to the problem reactions of just go down easier in some ways, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's when they grabbed that, they grabbed my attention. Oh, I just saw before we started to record that there's a thing called Rebel Wisdom. There's a YouTube channel called Rebel Wisdom.
Yeah, I've been aware of them for a couple of years.
So the guy was interviewing Eric Weinstein.
Yeah.
And Eric Weinstein was talking about Jeffrey Epstein.
Right.
And he was saying, how come how come journalists just don't ask these questions?
Right. The
How come
disc.
we're not getting
He calls
details?
it the disc. Jeffrey Epstein and the disc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So apparently he met Jeffrey Epstein. He met with him.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jeffrey Epstein had his quote unquote hedge fund, he was looking to do business with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there's no other indictment than that he was having a meeting with him. But, you know, they crossed paths. And he said that he didn't strike him as anybody that was a serious hedge fund or anything like that. But I found it interesting that he was talking about
Well,
it.
he goes on and on about why hasn't there been more attention paid to the going after Jeffrey Epstein or whatever. And I think this is part of what you're talking about. Like, we're trying to appeal to people who want to think something's being done. But my guess would be that just like Jeffrey Epstein worked for Mossad, that a lot of members of these intellectual dark web, right, they're either working from, maybe Eric works for Mossad. Maybe they're not working for him, but nobody in the intellectual dark web is ever critical of Israel, and they have never had anybody on, like, they never are, like, have, you can be, you can be like critical of Israel or in support of Palestine without necessarily being anti-Israel. They don't even have anyone like that on, right? There is never any attention paid to that issue, period, right? And so, like, you know, that would be something that Mossad would do, is have one of their agents go after another one of their agents as like a by deception we shall rule. Isn't that what they say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is. And there was something else. What was it? Had to do with what was it? It was one. Anyway, it popped in and out. But there was a certain point that I was going to make that had to do with this kind of movement towards what the whole time, 2024 thing. Switch gears a little bit. Let me think about this, because it's just popping in my head. Do you have anything else you want to say about these characters?
Well, no, I mean, I just think that, like, these are all people.
Oh, I know what it was. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead. Grab it.
All right. So if you follow their content, and whether it's on, say, Brett Weinstein's Darkhorse podcast or whatever,
Eric's portal,
that they will use over and over again. It's called evolutionary.
Yeah.
Evolutionary. Evolutionary this, evolutionary that, evolutionary.
Because he's
By the way,
biologist.
This is also a term that Joe Atwill uses.
Yeah.
Right? Evolutionary this, evolutionary that. And so what they're essentially talking about is these Darwinian ideas that are applied across all platforms of our experience. And there is absolutely no other, understanding or curiosity or any kind of, connection with any kind of epistemology, anything religious or anything spiritual. Like, where is the existence of God or consciousness? Now, they may find it on a DMT trip with Joe Rogan, but this is a movement away from, any kind of like idea or any kind of intellectual thought that embraces something greater than some, evolutionary pattern. It's devoid of that completely.
The only members of the quote unquote intellectual dark web that I've ever heard refer to God in any are Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. Right? They both talk about it in a little bit different way. If you notice, they've both been left off this picture, and Jordan Peterson is in a world of hurt. And, Ben Shapiro was like missing for several months until he popped up on Joe Rogan the other day. So maybe they're welcoming him back in. I don't know. But I haven't seen hardly anything of Ben Shapiro in the last several months. And I used to see him on things all the time. But the other thing is when Brett Weinstein was on Joe Rogan a few weeks ago, he also, in addition to proposing this idea about Andrew Yang and General McRaven, proposed that we go on a very harsh, very severe, very strict 6-week lockdown, right? So this idea, like, I think that, he was put there to sort of float this idea, and he wears the mask. I'm sorry, if you're a scientist and if you really understand evolutionary biology, I don't understand how you could think that was a good idea. Going on an extreme like he says, much harsher than what we had when we originally went on lockdown, right? And he thinks mask wearing is a good idea. And so again, this is pushing, like pretending like you're edgy, but pushing the establishment narrative kind of thing, right? And yeah, think about it. If we went on a hard 6-week lockdown and then came out of that and people were tired of that and didn't want business as usual with Joe Biden or whatever, and then this new party emerges, right about September or October after the second wave. I mean, I think you're onto something, Robert. I think you're...
Yeah, and it also dovetails kind of nicely, this whole evolutionary theory dovetails with systems management, systems operation.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And because it fits in, right? Because when there's this evolutionary concept, it's not intelligent design, but it is an outcome of a series of processes that reveal a functionality that is evolving over time, right? But it has nothing to do with creation or gnosis or any kind of divine spark, or so it fits really hand in glove with this idea of systems theory and systems management.
Yeah.
Because they're all very rational. These people are all very rational.
They're all very rational, and like they lay out these very like measured ideas and proposals that take them forever to explain and are not that creative or interesting, right? Like for the way that they're talking, you'd think that they were, explaining, how wormholes work, right? And actually, because they've actually been through one. But no, they're just basically laying out shit that I remember like talking about when I was, when we had student elections in fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the way things should work, right? When I'm president, it's going to be like this kind of shit, right? Like none of it's anything interesting.
Yeah. So again, this would be kind of a zeitgeist that would be representative of like a cybernetically driven sort of political ideology, because I really don't think that America is ready for AOC. I don't think they're ready for that, right? And we're kind of seeing that. But would they be ready for something like this? And
well,
I think the answer is yes.
They'd embrace it. They'd think it was so cool. It'd be like a brand new internet or something like that, right? Like this would be like the cool shiny new toy.
Douglas Murray is another one of these guys in their group.
Yeah,
I've seen him pop up as well.
I have maybe a inch or two more respect for Douglas Murray than some of these others.
Right.
I think he does point out a lot of things that need to be pointed out. But yeah, but again, not critical of Israel. You know what I mean? They all have the same stripe, right? All of these people have one same stripe, one identifying stripe. I mean, the only one who really doesn't have the stripe in any way is Joe Rogan that way, right? Like he has had someone like Abby Martin on his show over and over. You know what I mean? But whenever he has Abby Martin on, it's always followed up within a day or two by that CIA guy, right? It's like he comes and whips Joe Rogan back, back into line kind of. It's always like that. Within a week of her being there, that CIA guy he has on is always there. Right?
So I wanted to show you, this was Brett Weinstein's thesis at the University of Michigan. And this pretty much sums up the philosophy here. Evolutionary trade-offs, emergent constraints, and their adaptive consequences.
That's exactly what we're going through right now.
Right. This is it right here. You can see it all in his paper. And so these are his grandparents. This is who he talks about.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a lot of information on the Weinstein's actual parents. But he talks about how his grandparents inspired him. So, of course, there's thanks. And so here we go. This is his zone of equivalence, robustness versus efficiency in interglacial periods. And there's the abstract. So really what he begins to talk about in this paper is this idea of how to kind of deal with these rational trade-offs, right? And that the rational trade-offs allow some kind of evolutionary process to move forward.
Right.
Like for instance, a rational sort of trade-off would be, well, if we kill off a bunch of people over the age of 80, right? That allows us to
Yep.
have resources somewhere else for somebody else. And
Yep.
therefore, it's a trade-off.
Or if we
And it
give
allows
up,
us to
if we give up
evolve.
60% of our paycheck, then blah blah blah, right? Like that kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is really kind of, I think, the tabula rasa of what he believes.
Yeah. No, he very much believes that. Yes.
And is maybe the cornerstone in some ways of, this evolutionary kind of idea or concept, which is at the core of, I think, this intellectual dark web. Like I said, it fits right in with this idea of systems management in a lot of ways, which is what this reset is all about. So they would be the perfect, I think, executors.
I agree
of that kind of system.
Yep. I agree with you. I mean, like, I think it's a great point. It was kind of, Danny and I have talked a lot in the last couple of weeks about the Weinsteins. Danny reached out to Heather because she had met Heather once before, a few months back, right? She met Heather. And she's like, so we had listened several weeks back to a podcast that the two of them had done together. And while I disagreed with most things that they said, I thought it was an interesting conversation. So we're like, Danny's like, I'm going to reach out to Heather. Let's see if they'll do a show with us and we can talk about these ideas. And of course, no response, even though Heather has always responded to every other message that, Danny ever wrote to her and whatnot. But yeah, it's been weird the way that they have resurfaced, especially Brett, in such a major way, like during the time, like, as soon as the riots started, right? Like as soon as Minneapolis went down, he was their boy to come up. And they didn't quite send him around to like CNN and whatnot, but he was back on Tucker and he's on Joe Rogan and he's been on The Hill and all the sort of where the intellectual dark web people would get their news. You're right. And people have been hungry for it because it was a hot thing a couple of years ago and then it disappeared. Jordan Peterson disappeared. He's back in the fray, although.
Well, yeah, but not, he's a shell. He's a shell.
You even think it's the same dude?
I don't know, but I think it's interesting that the one guy that theoretically believed in God is the one guy that's been kind of removed from that equation.
And he was the leader of the pack with that. He was really who all the attention was around, and these other people sort of coalesced around him.
Yeah, so
he's just out.
He's on the outs now. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if it's the same guy or not, but he's definitely not the same person in some ways.
Well, that interview he did with his daughter, it was actually quite sad to watch.
Yeah, it was.
Part of it looked like she was handling him, right? Yeah. And then the other part, I mean, he was literally talking about like running from imaginary people in trees during his psychosis. I'm like, that can happen, but you don't say that part out loud.
And there's just like missing gaps in his story in some ways as well, because you would think that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's a clinical psychologist.
Yep. How could he not know that would make him?
How could he not know that benzos would? And apparently benzos not only like you get addicted to them, they change your brain.
Yep.
They change your brain, and so why would somebody like Jordan Peterson, who would understand the pharmacology of something like this, because he could actually prescribe it, why would he be taking those?
Sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all, really.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And I know that he was under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, but you would also think that in some ways he would be equipped based on everything that he's written and knows chapter and verse, that he'd be able to get through this period, whatever triggered it. I guess it was his wife being ill or something like that, right? Is that what happened?
Yeah, that's what he says. Yeah.
But I also think that you could only burn that hot for a period of time.
Yep.
And he was burning really hot all the time.
All the time.
And I think eventually that flame would wind up getting
I think
snuffed out or very, very weak. But he's really not. So now this movement has really fallen to the two brothers.
Yep.
And they're the ones that are sort of leading the pack here. And so anyway, I started to make those connections, and I thought these are the people that I think would be poised to bring in the new version of socialism, the one that would be acceptable.
And it's going to be the synthesis of libertarianism and socialism.
That's right. That's what it'll look like. So, it'll be this interesting compromise that people who think they're smart will buy into.
Absolutely.
And,
All right, now on to our favorite our favorite topic to banter back and forth about all day on text. Mr. Tim Pool. Boy, Faye, where do you want to start? You send me the funniest little one-liners about Tim. But it's getting, like I've always had my issues with Tim. Anybody who's watched this show or the show I do with Danny, right? Like there's a lot of things about Tim that bother me. He also does some good work, but it's starting to look awfully strange, right? Like is there a moment of the day that he's not live streaming with Adam or making video? Like literally, it's like a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, video making, live streaming. They never change their clothes. Do they go to the bathroom or get something to eat? Do they ever go outside? Like where are they actually? What is going on?
they're always streaming, right?
Always.
They're always streaming. They're always engaged in, banter. So, okay, let me just, let me just kind of backtrack and tell you how I started to pay attention to. It was you. You were like, Tim Pool, this. And I'd seen him on Joe Rogan with that interview with Vijaya and Jack Dorsey.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who he was. And I thought, well, this is a pretty sharp young dude, right? He's a sharp guy. And then I knew he had a podcast for me because he would talk about him. So then you sent me something and I watched, like, okay, this is kind of interesting. So I started to watch him, and I actually played him a lot when my mother was here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think my mother liked him because he was very level-headed. He talked about things in a very rational way. And every time he went through a political situation, 90% of the time it was pro-Trump. Okay. So I was watching the show, but I was also watching the effect that it had on my mother. Like I wasn't doing it on purpose. Like she wasn't my lab rat or anything.
You weren't trying to red pill her or anything.
I wasn't really, but I felt like it would be like something we could both watch, right? So the more I watched Tim Pool, the more I began to see sort of kind of what was going on. And then I just clicked in my head and I said, Tim Pool is Donald Trump's new Alex Jones.
Got it.
He is the new Alex Jones for Donald Trump. And it really fits in a lot of ways too, because Trump needs a new demographic, right?
Yeah.
Like the Alex Jones demographic, they've already either nailed that demographic or they're getting too old or they're cynical and they've jumped off the train. So they need, kind of fresh blood. And Tim Pool's right in that sweet spot of like late millennial, early Gen X, right?
They need that crowd that probably would have voted for Bernie Sanders. They really need that crowd.
That's right. And so I think Tim Pool is, first of all, I think he's intelligence. I think he's intel. That's what I think.
Yep.
That's my sense. He's mixed race, part Korean, part, whether that doesn't really matter, but I'm just giving you kind of my, like, what are you doing, Jasper?
So what do you know about Tim Pool? Do you know kind of where he comes from?
Well, I know he's from Chicago originally. I know that he was a skater and very into skating. And, he's got that sort of Gen X profile. He's got like street cred, right?
So Tim Pool made
and he worked with Vice magazine. He worked with Vice. He did a whole thing with Vice.
Tim Pool made his name by being the first person to start live streaming from Occupy Wall Street. He was
right. I remember that too. Yeah.
He went down there with his camera and his drone and started filming. And he wasn't really, maybe a little bit, but he wasn't offering commentary on things. He was just showing the action. And occasionally he might have some banter back and forth with the kid who was on the ground there, right? But he got named by, I forget which magazine, but like one of the top 10 fresh faces in media or whatever, something like that. He won some award, right? Like that year for the work he did at Occupy Wall Street. He then got, when Vice decided to go from a magazine to like a news thing, he was quote unquote a founding member. Right. And then he was with them for a number of years as the material evolved.
And he went into like hot zones. That was his thing.
that he went for Vice and then for Fusion. He would go. But everything with him was always reporting from the streets until about a year and a half ago, and then he kind of started doing what he's been doing now. But he's always been a fence sitter. He's always been like from all the places he's been. Right, he has to be pretty clear to him what the conspiracy is now, but he always talks about how much he hates. He's there to try and like make conspiracy theories not cool while peddling level 1 conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Like right now, the things that he and Adam are talking about are the same things that were the content of the Alex Jones show in 2000.
Yeah.
Right? And people are like, oh my God, this is cutting edge shit, right? And basically what he does is read newspaper articles on videos and repeat, kind of gives his opinion, which is not an opinion. He'll say, he'll put it like, oh my God, blah, 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 but maybe it's not that, maybe it's this, but maybe it is. Like, it's this very confusing. The reason he's allowed to say anything that's off the mainstream narrative is because the way he delivers it creates, in my opinion, cognitive dissonance in the mind of the person taking it in. Well, it might be. Well, it might not be. You can never really know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Right? And he's been doing this for a while. He had, in my opinion, a shining moment when he was on with Vijaya and Jack Dorsey. And that was really, I think, the moment he moved to having like a higher level of cred, right? Because the way he did that was actually quite brilliant. But since then, you're right. It's been this drift over. And then all of a sudden, like, in the last few months, like the narrative seems to have shifted to he has this friend Adam who's waking up, and he and Tim are in constant conversation 24 hours a day, and we've watched the evolution of Adam from a left-wing vegan person to a proud Trump supporter, right? And
yeah, that's a really interesting that's a really interesting sort of frame, because you're watching somebody before your very eyes wake up, right?
Right. And Tim isn't willing to say he's a Trump supporter, but he's clearly coaching, walking Adam across the street, right? And neither of them have changed their clothes since they started their conversation months back. They've literally been sitting in the same position, wearing the same thing, both in beanies for all this period of time. And, the girl is on the computer, I don't know what's going on there. But when I look at, so I agree with you at this point. I do think Tim is intelligence, whether he knows it or not, right? He's intelligence either way, but I agree with you. I think something's going, he was hired at some point, whether he was always intelligence or he became at a certain point. But Adam is the interesting case. If you look at Adam and then think about like we've watched like certain TV shows where they have like, think about like the show Person of Interest that used to be on. And then when they would use undercover agents, they would look like that, right? They would have like the kind of scruffy looking thing, even though you can kind of tell that they're actually clean underneath. And the beanie, Adam looks stupid in the beanie. He's got the beanie and the glasses and shit. He looks like an undercover agent to me, right? Like the whole thing is so fucking weird. And now he does his podcast with Tim, and now he has his own podcast. Why do we care about this person, right? I'm not saying I do.
Exactly.
There are now people who listen to him all day. He doesn't know anything.
Right. I mean, at least Tim Pool has some background. He's a journalist. He's been in hot zones, no-go zones, and so he's got a bit of a platform.
Now Adam is making a full living as a podcaster, right? Yeah. He's talking with Tim all day, and I was just popped in for like a few minutes on their podcast yesterday, and they're literally making hundreds of dollars an hour in super chat donations. I'm not talking about monthly patronage or subscriptions. I'm talking about like people like want to ask a question, so they give $200, right? There were several of these, right? And it's for both. And now he has his own podcast, and it's on the Timcast IRL channel. So he's starting his podcast on a channel with 300 and something thousand subscribers. And over all of Tim's channels, he has millions of subscribers, right? Like literally, like somebody's paying $200 to ask Adam a question.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
It's ironic, right?
What's going on?
Yeah. Well, apparently he was a model at some point. That's what he says.
Okay.
And again, if you're looking at somebody who fits the bill as a spy models are great spies.
Great.
They travel internationally. They hang out with rich people.
Yeah, and people think
they do things.
Yeah, people think they just look good and that they're not the brightest, sharpest tool in the shed.
Well, but they, in many cases, that they'll do things. They'll have sex and
Yep.
And they'll get paid for it, or they won't get paid for it, but they'll learn things. So they're conduits. Like models and actors are great spies.
Models, actors, singers, all athletes. Athletes are great too. I mean, Dennis Rodman was a great spy. It probably still is, right?
Katarina Witt was a spy.
Katarina Witt. Yeah, she was a great skater too. She was a beautiful skater, but yeah, she was a spy.
She got a little too top heavy there. Took her center of gravity off.
She did, but she had an elegance that, like, the little girl.
No, she was great.
Yeah.
That guy Richard Anderson, who played MacGyver, he dated her and he outed her as a spy.
Yeah, I think a lot of the famous Eastern Bloc athletes were spies. I think that, I mean, there's so much weird. You were talking about that Chuck whatever the other day.
Chuck Barris.
Chuck Barris. I've given my theories on Deborah Harry in the movie Atomic Blonde and whatnot. Like, lots of, famous people. We all know about what's going on with George Clooney and, all of that kind of stuff. But, yeah, no, I agree with you. It is kind of, but I think you're right, though. I think that, like, Tim Pool's channels are the new Trump News Network, right?
Absolutely. Because they want to cultivate younger people.
They know the TV is dead. They know it's fake news, right? And, yeah, I haven't seen Tim Pool say anything that at the end of the day doesn't end up being in support of Trump, right? Like, he says something pro-Trump and then he walks it back, but then at the end, like, ultimately he's basically, I mean, if you don't even have to watch the videos, just look at the titles of his videos, and it's an extreme. If you look from where he was a couple of years ago to where he is now, it's an extreme shift. Yeah. So I don't know if this was always his job or if he, got hired by someone new. I don't know what is going on. But
yep, and the fact that they're getting all this money during these super chats, like, who's funding them all this money?
That's what I'm saying. Like, the only way that any of this makes sense to me is it's just a way of funneling money, right? Mm-hmm. And for them to be going all day, right, and for talking about nonsense and moving all this money through there. Right? Like, it's, and they may not even be the recipients of all of it. It may be spreading out and going to a bunch of other things that are happening. But I mean, that's actually a brilliant way to move money from intelligence agencies or corporations or think tanks or whatever to your agents and your operatives on the ground.
Oh, it's just hidden in plain sight.
Down in super chat.
It's hidden in plain sight. It's right there.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting watching him just move closer and closer and closer towards, Trump and the right, and and using the chaos and the anarchy of the left as a counterpoint, because of all these various violations, whether they're free speech or free thought or whatever. So he's got a little bit of a libertarian kind of bent as well.
Did you notice, though, also he never goes out on the street anymore? All of his reporting used to be from the action, and now he's never outside, right? So, which makes me.
Well, yeah, I mean, don't they do that in New Jersey? Isn't that where they broadcast that from?
I mean, that's what they say now, but who knows? It's hard to tell, right? I've watched him move from apartment to apartment to apartment. Like, he's always broadcasting from a different apartment every year, it seems like. And now he seems to be in a studio.
Well, that's a studio.
Seems to be in a studio.
That's a studio. They're set up.
Go home?
What's that?
Do he and Adam ever go home?
Well, apparently Adam's married.
Interesting.
At least that's what he says.
I mean, but they literally seem to be streaming 24 hours a day.
There's not a time when I don't see
videos.
At least 2 or 3 times a day, because I subscribe to his channel.
Yeah.
And ring the bell and.
They have multiple channels. Tim has 2 or 3 of his personal channels, and then he has the Timcast IRL that they stream together on. And there's just, it's constant. It's constant.
And again, like, if you look at, like, the graphics and everything, like, the graphics are there immediately.
Yep.
They're there immediately. And you and I do all this by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if I feel creative, I'll put together, a graphic or something. But to put together a decent, and by the way, theirs are kind of like, they have a style. They always
have a template, yeah.
Template. But still, to be able to do that, right? They've got somebody else doing that. They're like, his hands never touch those graphics.
Nope.
They've got somebody that is taking care of all the technical stuff to keep the stream going, right? And that's a robust. That is really a broadcast quality stream.
Yep.
There's never any glitches. Like you and I'll do stuff, things that get a little weird, but there's never any glitches there. Broadcast style quality, just like Alex Jones. They got people doing that. And then they've got to, have the administrative side. They got to pay rent on a studio and all those other things.
Yep. And they can afford to have their videos demonetized.
But did their videos get demonetized?
Yeah, a lot of his videos, like he even say, like, the dude, this video is going to get demonetized. Like, so there was a time when he was more concerned about being demonetized.
But have they though? Have his videos been demonetized?
When he says that, what he means is they're not going to put an ad on that one. So he won't make money.
But they still allow him to have super chats.
Yeah, right.
I can't even have a stupid super chat.
No, right. As soon as we get this channel up to over 1,000, we can start super chatting on this.
Super chat has been. I've been denied super chat.
We're gonna get super chat, dude.
And I'm really, in that world, I'm a small fish.
Well, they've been,
but I can't get a super chat.
They've been throttling your numbers forever. Like, it's just, Sonia and I were talking this the other day, and Sonia never complains about this shit. But you and Sonia have been around for a long time, right? Yeah. You have lots of clients and lots of people that follow you, and it is impossible to me. You guys have about the same numbers on YouTube, right? The same number of subscribers. You may even have more than she does or whatever. It feels impossible to me that could be your actual numbers. But I've also watched, like, your videos, like, there'll be a high number count and then later it'll be lower, right? I'll look and I'll be like, wow, that one got over 1,000 views already that quickly. And then later in the day, it'll say like 700. Right? Yeah,
it's a really strange and unusual process. And I've just had to let that whole thing go.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't.
It is what it is. If I really focused on it, it would drive me
batty. But there was a time when he was more concerned. Like, you and I both have we watch people like Jimmy Dore or others, like, be careful about what they say because of monetization, right? They want to keep the ads on their video. At a certain, you know what I mean? Like, Tim makes tons and tons, and he's got to be making an absolute ton of money, right?
What the hell does he do with it? He never leaves the damn studio.
He said, this is what I listened to him talk about that. And first of all, I believe he's a hard worker. He's obviously a hard worker, right? Yeah. But he didn't go to college. He decided he was just going to make it on his own. And when he got his very first job working for Vice or whatever, right? He literally just saved all the money. He never spent it because they were paying for him to go from place to place to place to place, right? And so, I mean, he had like a cheap apartment somewhere that they may have even paid for that. He literally didn't spend any of the money. And he said when the day came that they didn't want to let him tell, I can't remember if this was at Vice or at Fusion, to tell the story the way he wanted to tell it, he walked. And he felt like he could do that because he had saved all the money, for as much time. They put golden handcuffs on him. They said, you can't go work for someone else till your contract runs out. But he had money, and so he from there could go and do what he wanted to do. Now, I do think he's had help, and I think he has money from unidentified sources and all that kind of stuff. But I do believe him that he does believe in hard work and saving your money. I don't think he spends any of his money.
Yeah, it's obvious because he has no opportunities to spend it. Well, he's there all the time.
And he doesn't even change his clothes. His beanie's reversible. It's black on one side and gray on the other. So every once in a while, he turns it inside out when his head starts to itch, and that's it, dude.
Yeah. So anyway, it's just been interesting to see this guy evolve and really take on the role of kind of a Pied Piper in some ways. I mean, he kind of feels a little bit like a Pied Piper.
Yeah, I agree.
And trying to cultivate this new demographic.
I agree. All right, we've mashed a lot of Matrix. Is there anything left to mash, my friend?
We were going to talk about Ben Hollander, but
most people don't know. Like, when I mentioned it to somebody, they thought, oh, that's the one we talked about last time, right? But another men's rights activist has been killed, and this one was weird.
Yeah. So this guy, Roy Den Hollander, was supposedly the guy that killed the son of this Judge Salas, who is presiding over the money side of the Epstein case with Deutsche Bank. And it happened last week, and apparently a FedEx guy showed up at their home. The son answered the door, and the FedEx guy, killed the son. Now,
and harmed the father.
And harmed the father. Now, apparently, what was it, a day or so later, that this Den Hollander character showed up dead.
Hollander.
What's that?
Roy Den Hollander.
Roy Den Hollander, yeah. But he shows up dead by, gunshot wound, killed himself. Now, the connection between the events is that Den Hollander had been sort of jousting with this judge who's a female, Salas. And he was doing the same thing that Angelucci was doing in California. And they were essentially moving forward so that the draft would draft both women and men, because they were both men's rights activists. And it's like, if you want this to be equal, if you want equal rights, then let's start with the draft, selective service. And so they were both moving sort of in concert from different parts of the country. And Salas agreed to move forward with the process, right? To have his case heard and, get it to the next level. But apparently her demeanor or her process around it was really slow. Like, she was dragging her heels. She's like playing the clock out maybe on something. And he didn't like it. He thought that she was, essentially cock blocking the whole process, although she had agreed to it, right? Now, he's a men's rights activist, so he's, theoretically like anti-woman. It's like that's how it could be spun. And there was a really weird segment on Stephen Colbert. Did you watch that segment?
I didn't watch the segment, but I read about it.
So there's a segment with him and Stephen Colbert, and Colbert's asking these questions, and he's being very upfront and clear about his ideas around sex and roles and feminism. And he's painted to look, I mean, if you didn't know that the guy was real, you would think it was a complete satire, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a couple, I don't know thinking.
So they set him up as like a wacko.
Yeah.
Right. He's like a wacko, and he hates women. And he becomes now the de facto, like, Lee Harvey Oswald here. And he even has like 3 names, like Roy Den Hollander.
Right.
Even though he has a few other names in between the Roy Den Hollander part. So now, because he's dead, there's no real camera, there's no witnesses that said this is the guy that killed the judge. They're just making this assumption, right, because there was friction and they had a thing. Right. That it's the most obvious conclusion that he killed himself because he was the guy that dressed up as the FedEx guy. And the thing that really kind of like doesn't make sense to me is the fact that if he's a men's rights lawyer, why would he kill a young man? Right? If he was a men's rights, why would he kill a young man? That makes no sense to me at all.
No, I don't. I mean, there's no thinking person that could believe this, right? Because he's already aware that people have a bias against men's rights activists. So no matter how annoyed he is with this woman, he's not going to do something to feed into that kind of.
No, and he's got a big case, like a huge case.
And
like
also
a case that could change the history of the country.
Right, and also the other guy died the week before, and he had to be
right. Now we have the Mark Angelucci,
right,
who died the week before. Same thing.
Right.
He, however, clearly was killed. There was no suicide there. So essentially, 2 of these guys get wiped out.
This guy was killed too. Like let's just get real. They killed a lot of birds with one stone on this one, right? Yeah. They got rid of him. They used it to frighten her and to create more shitstorm around this Epstein thing, right? Like
Yeah.
there was, I think, at least one other bird that they killed with this stone that you told me about. I forget what it is right now. And then you told me this. You told me about. You told me go watch the Tim Pool video, and there's a guy. You didn't tell me his name, right? So I go look it up, and I see his name is Roy Den Hollander, right? And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Danny and I just reviewed Athlete A, right? Of course, which is about the gymnastics and then Larry Nassar. And the person who's Athlete A is Maggie Nichols. She was the first person, her coach reported to Steve Penny, and that went nowhere. But the first person to actually report to the police in the Indy Star about Larry Nassar was Rachel Den Hollander, who was also an attorney. So I'm like, that's weird, right? I've never heard the name Den Hollander, but until Rachel, I heard it a couple of years ago. But that's kind of weird that both of these people are having prominence. It's just weird to me, right? And then I remembered that, so you told me this guy, they made him look like an ass clown on Stephen Colbert. And then I remembered that they did the same thing to Andrew Basiago. You remember Andrew Basiago?
Yeah.
He was on, I can't remember if it was Colbert or Jon Stewart, but they did the same thing. They made him look like a wackadoodle, right? And the reason I bring this up is he came up in a show I did with Shane Bales that left a few weeks ago. And then after the show, somebody sent me a thing going, I wonder what happened to Andrew Basiago. Wasn't his whole thing that they had picked him to supposedly run for president in 2020? Where is he? And I realized we haven't actually heard anything from Andrew Basiago in a long time. And the last time I heard anybody say anything about him, I interviewed him years ago, said that he was in hiding because he was scared that people were after him.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So he also had been made fun of. He went on very earnestly onto, I can't remember if it was Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, because they were related at some point, weren't they? Those shows where like Stephen Colbert had a bit on the Jon Stewart show. That's how he started his thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that popped up as another weird synchronicity kind of around this, but with something else that was going on. So everything is just as awfully fucking weird as it could possibly be right now. We couldn't possibly live in a weirder world than we do.
So Rachel Den Hollander, that is not her name. She's married to somebody by the name of Jacob Den Hollander.
All right.
So and he is. So apparently they're quite religious, and he's a PhD student at a.
She dresses almost like she's like Mennonite or something like that, or like she doesn't wear a bonnet or anything like that, but she's very, she looks like she's from a different era, the Victorian era or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's this piece. I hate this. Let's just do this. See what happens.
I mean, just the number of synchronicities. It's like if we aren't in some kind of weird simulation that, sort of spits out multiples. I mean, that's what we started this show with the Weinstein part. The Weinstein, Hayer. Now we have a bunch of Den Hollanders. Have you ever heard that name before? Den Hollander until now?
No, Den Hollander is definitely not a common name. But astrologically, we're in this true node in Gemini period, and you were watching my Sunday night show, and I got into this whole concept of Janus, the two-faced god.
Yeah.
Which is very much in alignment with this idea around Gemini, and this Janus archetype is like really prevalent right now. And then when you really drill down into the idea of Janus, it's everywhere. Like Janus was like one of the most revered gods. It was like it was like in the pantheon, Janus was incredibly high. So the whole idea with Janus is that it represented kind of a ritual, right? So one face would be looking into the past, and you would enter into sort of this space, and then you would come out on the other side, because Janus represents beginnings and endings, and
that's totally where we are right now. Yeah.
So we're in like a Janus ritual, and it's no coincidence, right. Yeah. Really, that everything around this whole Corona thing started in January.
Yeah.
January. And then what happens after that? Well, when is the next real big explosion? Well, the next big explosion is when? It's in June. Well, it actually was in May.
March and then May, and the very end of May, yeah.
Well, but So the whole George Floyd thing
Yeah.
happens on May 25th,
Yep.
but it extends into the month of June.
The big riots and stuff started like June 1st.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have the Juneteenth and everything.
Yep.
So Juno, the goddess Juno, is also connected to Janus because Juno represents beginnings.
Okay, you want to know, can I just do another synchronicity for you?
Hold on, one more quick. I got to finish this, and then you can jump in. Juno represents beginnings, like she is like the virgin bride. And then the other goddess that plays a role in this whole Janus thing is Vesta. And Vesta represents endings, right? So Janus is connected to beginnings and endings.
Wow.
Vesta is the outcome. And Vesta is ruled by the month of September.
Okay, so here we come.
Vesta is a virgin. And when we think of September, we think of Virgo, the virgin. So I guarantee you, September is going to be the next hot spot.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yep. And then also October apparently plays a role in the whole Janus sort of process. So there will be another kind of culminating point in October, hopefully after our event.
All right.
So go ahead.
Go with this because my mind is just doing this. So you just said Juno, right? And of course, what's her name? Ellen Page was in a movie called Juno.
Yep.
Right?
And it's about being pregnant.
Right. And we just watched this show called Umbrella Academy. And of course, the riots started off with the person in the umbrella and Eric Weinstein with the umbrella. This show is called Umbrella Academy, right? And she's in it. She's in this show. And she's it's about a bunch of kids that are basically MKs and brothers and sisters adopted. And she's the only one that seems to not have a special talent. But she has this special relationship with a chimpanzee that is their butler that wears a vest, right? And so I'm thinking about evolutionary biology and Darwinism and all these it's just weird. Like the connections never end. But this show's called Umbrella Academy.
Yeah, right? I think I've seen. I think I haven't seen it, but I'm familiar with the name.
It is weird. Like you can just, everything. It's always been, but in a much less obvious way that everything connects to everything else. But right now, it's just like you could literally just connect the dots all day long with everything and end up with a very cohesive picture.
Yeah, it would be very well. It would. I'm cohesive. I'm not so sure. They would definitely be connected.
Yeah.
And I think being able to get above the situation, so you can see the pattern, right? Like, you don't know what the Nazca Plains are by driving around the Nazca Plains.
No.
If you get above it, you can see what those lines are. Our challenge is to get above this thing so that we can look down and say, oh, well, look at this and look at this and look at this. And, once you have that perspective, then you can kind of see sort of, how this whole thing unfolds in some ways.
Yeah, the symbols are everywhere. So you just have to pull back enough to be able to see what's.
They are everywhere. They're really everywhere. Keep your eye on Louisville.
Okay.
Louisville is going to be a major hotspot over the next week, and of course, there's the connection with Louis, King Louis, right?
Yeah.
King Louis, and when we get into King Louis, what do we get into? We get into the French Revolution and all that stuff, so that's going to be, Louisville probably going to go off because this whole thing with Breonna Taylor, and you have the NFAC, and they're all going to go down to Louisville now and get justice for Breonna Taylor. And the Breonna Taylor event.
So yeah.
And Breonna Taylor, I looked at that. It makes absolutely no sense at all.
Yeah, I heard you talking about it the other day. I was aware of the name and that there had been an incident, but I wasn't aware of the details until I heard you talking.
So there's always three of these things. And you have Breonna Taylor, you have Ahmaud Arbery, and then you have George Floyd. And I think in succession, I think that's how they went.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are not familiar with Breonna Taylor is that she was a nursing student, again, theoretically. Because I've looked, I can't find anything on her past.
Interesting.
So she was a nursing student living in Louisville. She was asleep with her boyfriend, and the police did a no-knock raid. They got the place wrong, and the boyfriend picks up a gun and defends Breonna Taylor and starts shooting. The police apparently put 28 slugs in Breonna Taylor, but the boyfriend does not get a slug. And I'm like, what?
But why were they even there, the police?
Because they supposedly that was an apartment building that was doing drug dealing, right? That there was like weird stuff with UP. The same thing happened in San Antonio when Houston. It was in Houston when Art Acevedo sent his thugs in to basically go bust down the wrong door and start shooting some people. Now, I think that event was probably real because nothing ever really came of that. But the Breonna Taylor thing is weird because how does the boyfriend not even get a scratch, okay? Not even a scratch. But Breonna Taylor becomes this martyr. And of course, what do we see her in? She's in her nursing gear, her
COVID-19.
So where are we? We're in Coronaville.
Yeah.
So now we have now you've got this weird convergence of this young Black nurse, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, can you think of like a more potent symbol?
Yeah.
And I think even like one of her scrubs is like violet, almost like purple, right?
Right.
So then what happens, just a couple days ago, the cops are let off. Well, there's a reason why the cops were let off. Because nothing happened. They couldn't charge him with anything. And the boyfriend was not charged with anything. So there's really no resolution around this. Now, the NFAC guys are...
What NFAC is?
Not fucking around... I forget what the C part is. Basically, it's a group led by this guy named Grandmaster Jay. And Grandmaster Jay is a Black separatist.
Okay.
And they did a march on Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Okay, I saw that one.
His whole thing is that he wants to basically take over Texas. That they need reparations.
They did an armed march, right? They did an armed march on Stone Mountain.
They did an armed march, which was really bizarre because a lot of the guns were weird looking, 22 LRs. Some of the people that were part of his march were actually actors from Atlanta that had answered like an acting call. So there's a lot of stuff around NFAC that's a little suspect. I've been on their Twitter threads. Their Twitter threads, if you take them seriously, they're kind of scary on some level, right?
Yeah.
Like they see themselves as they're like the extension of a prophecy. Like they're a group that's supposed to fill out this prophecy of this 400-year cycle. And this 400-year cycle is over. So now there's going to be competition between the 12 tribes as to who's going to run the planet.
Gotcha.
Right? It's almost Game of Thrones like.
Gotcha.
And so their idea is that they've got to knock off all these various groups so that they can be victorious, right? And I was following their Twitter thread before I really knew who these people were. I just stumbled upon it, like, what are these people talking about? And it was a lot of it was incredibly violent.
Yeah.
And
but they don't get kicked off Twitter.
No, nobody like that ever gets kicked off Twitter. Yeah. So they had a march in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and they were calling out crackers, and they were calling out, we're going to come after you. And they were all marching. They're all dressed in black. And Grandmaster Jay, supposedly has about, 20 black belts or whatever. So he's their leader. I think he was a DJ. I think I've seen him actually.
No, I was going to say, well, Grandmaster Flash was definitely.
Well, there was Jam Master Jay.
Jam Master Jay and Grandmaster Flash.
And then there's Jam Master Jay. I think he's the same guy, by the way. Huh. And I actually saw him like selling this like DJ thing on the shopping channel. It was weird. Anyway, but he's their leader. He does a lot of stuff on Instagram and, call to arms. So he wants to bring now 15,000 of his armed militia to Louisville so that they can, met out justice for Breonna Taylor. And if you really look at the Breonna Taylor case, it really feels like a false flag. The Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, all three of them feel so false flaggy,
Yeah.
so false flaggy, and each one began to pick up like more momentum. Like, so if you're black,
Speaking of false flags, that fucking Kamala Harris deepfake. How about that?
oh, that's weird. So if you're black and you're paying attention, oh, Breonna Taylor, there's another one, right? There's another one, and then the Ahmaud Arbery, there's another one. He was jogging, and they hunted him down, and they killed him.
Yeah.
And I think that's a false flag too. I think it's a total false flag. And I broke that down. There's just so many things that are not right about that Ahmaud Arbery thing. And then we could get into the whole George Floyd thing. And again, I think it's a more false flaggy. So they've used these three events to become these like combustible, accelerants.
Yeah. God bless. I don't have the bandwidth anymore to put these events apart the way I used to. Like at a certain point I got to where like I just felt like I didn't have to do them anymore because they were all the same. You know what I mean? But it's important that people go through and keep track of all these details. I used to really go through and look at everything and peel these things apart and whatnot. But that Ahmaud Arbery one stuff was really weird. And the George Floyd case, I mean, there's so tons of things that don't make sense. I know almost nothing about this Breonna Taylor case other than what you said. But I'll say this, you know what Stone Mountain, Georgia is? The district that Cynthia McKinney was the congresswoman from.
Interesting. Yeah, they were trying to call out the crackers there. So the idea now is to have an armed confrontation in Louisville.
Oh, okay. So they're calling Louisville out as the spot where they're going to get their.
Yeah, they're going to go get justice for Breonna Taylor, and they call it formation. We're going to go into formation, and he's calling for 15,000 armed.
For what day?
I think it's I think it's this week. Is it this week? I think it might be this weekend. But I'll tell you something, which is a fact that people probably should kind of wrap their head around. And because I do follow these things, the gun sales have gone through the roof in the last 2 months.
Yep.
And the gun sales of the black community have really gone through the roof.
Yep.
Like there's been a 37 to 38% increase in sales.
Yep.
To the black community with guns. Okay, so the fires are being stoked. Sauron is creating the orcs, and the guns or the firearms are just coming out. These pits of fire. It reminds me in a lot of ways of like the movie Zardoz. You ever see Zardoz?
No.
You should watch Zardoz. You'll dig it.
It's
one of the weirdest movies. So Sean Connery.
Okay.
And he plays this character called Zed. Right? I think it's Zed. And it's in the future, right? And there's this whole world that has been created by this guy named Arthur Dent. And Arthur Dent appears as a god. And in his world, he shoots out all these weapons to all these savages. And so he's like a god in this savage. But Arthur Dent belongs to this other society where they have absolutely no violence. They're completely like telepathic and stuff, and they're real poofters. So what happens is that Sean Connery somehow gets into this giant head who's supposed to be Zardoz, which is a take on Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah.
And he gets into this thing, and he finds that Zardoz is just like a human, and he can't handle it, and he throws him out. So this giant head flies back to where Arthur Dent is from. So now the savage has come into this world where everything is completely refined and things are, telepathic, and so he becomes this virus that eventually winds up destroying their world.
Oh wow!
It's an interesting movie, but the image of these guns flying out of the mouth of Zardoz into the waiting hands of all these people have been they've been programmed to go maraud and kill, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same theme that comes out of the Lord of Rings with Sauron.
Yeah.
Same deal, right? So this is we're seeing this now kind of play out before our eyes, and people are being turned into monsters. we're being turned into monsters, and based on a lot of old grudges, misinformation,
Yep.
programming, bad drugs, bad food,
Yep.
propaganda.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're in a time now of really high volatility.
You know what's
Very
so,
high volatility.
you know what's so crazy? When you just said we're in a time of, I remembered about 2 years ago when you said we're in a time of cognitive dissonance. Doesn't that seem like such a nice, sweet, innocent world, right? Back Parkland shooting compared to where we're
Yeah,
at
that
now?
was that was like something you could.
David cognitive dissonance, yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't that seem like, that seems like fucking the Magic Kingdom compared to, what we're in now?
Yeah, I tell you though, you just go back and look at some of that stuff, and what comes out of that whole Parkland thing. You got the sunrise movement, right?
Yep.
And which is basically this hardcore young militant kind of leftist sort of brigade that's infiltrated high schools, and now they're going after the sunrise movement are going after grade schoolers. They're going after fucking grade schoolers.
I saw that little meeting that they had online, their little Zoom conference with the girls from junior high school and stuff like that. I was like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah, right. I mean, that comes out of the whole Parkland thing.
Yep.
So,
we live in a mad world, my friend.
did you get my thing on Emma Gonzalez? Did you catch that Emma Gonzalez piece?
A lot, like several years back, a couple years back.
No, this was last week.
No, tell me.
So just to jog your memory, Emma Gonzalez is
I remember.
one of the Parkland kids.
Yeah, shaved head from Burbank.
So her mother goes by Beth Gonzalez, but that's not her maiden name, right? Her maiden name is Wiegand, like Wiegand. So I went into her background and I looked into her family. Her father was an admiral in the Navy.
Of course.
And so Beth Gonzalez, Emma's mother, was raised in and around places like Arlington, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia. Total military background.
Yeah.
And then her father went into private contract work after he left the Navy, just like David Hogg's dad did, right?
Yep.
Family business.
Of course. Yeah.
I mean, really what reality is it's like a network of spooks.
Yeah.
It's a network of spooks, military industrial families.
I don't agree with everything he says, but Miles Mathis is right about a lot of stuff, right? Is it Miles Mathis or Miles Matheson?
It's Miles Mathis, and he talks about this.
In one of his early articles, he talks about trying to understand a world where there's 1,000 people in charge of bothering one.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we're basically dealing with here, is like for every one normal person, there's 1,000 people charged with irritating them or creating a false reality for them, or they're spooking them or whatever it is.
Right. And he might even be a spook himself, Miles Mathis. Seriously.
Why not? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, but it's crazy. It is. You're right though. That's what this is. Like everything is just a great big, I don't even know. There's not even a word for it.
And one of the things that Tim Pool did bring up that I thought was interesting is that he was saying that he and Adam are like NPCs in some ways. Yeah. And there are times when I look at Spook World and all this other stuff, and I'm like, it's all kind of happening around us.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, we're kind of background characters too.
Yeah. Well, it depends what you think the main story is.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's all perspective that way, right? So, like in some versions of reality, Tim's a main player. In other versions, he's just an NPC, and that goes for all of us, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. It depends where your focus is at. So I know where your focus is at. You have a new website up today.
I do. Did you check it out?
I haven't been over there yet, but I'm going to when we hop off. I'm excited to see it, and I think you have a page up for the event in October. Yes. Yep,
it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool website.
All right.
I have to say, and this gal Alicia just pulled my ass out of the fryer. She connected with me through being on Jay Widener's show, and And then we connected, and she's just what she does for a living, and she's a professional. And it was just one of those things, like the universe dropped her into my lap. And we have a business relationship. I paid her, but I'm not paying her like some of her other clients pay her.
Yeah.
So
I'm still trying to sort my scenario out with the website, but that will be coming soon. But I've got a lot of other interesting, cool stuff going on. We have a cool conspiracy cocktail this weekend. I have my friend Chad Stumpy. I don't know if you're familiar with his work.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's amazing. He really is an expert on this sort of idea as like cities or geographic locations as stargates or portals.
Oh, that guy from Detroit, the Detroit guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like his work.
Yeah. So he's going to be sitting in as guest, and we're kind of going to revisit one of his original articles that he ever wrote called "Connecting with the Wormhole," and we're going to sort of talk about it, move from like using the outer world, like the cities and stuff like that, to sort of the internal world of that possibility. Because if the world gets sort of weirder and weirder, travel is going to be different. That we're going to have to learn how to travel a different way. So we're going to have a deep and interesting conversation on the various ways to connect with, to traverse wormholes and whatnot. So I'm looking forward to that. So guys, come over and check out Conspiracy Cocktail. Go check out Robert's new website, robertphoenix.com. I'd say get a reading, but I think you're up to your eyeballs, aren't you?
Well, I can always look into the future, but it's been a very busy time. But it's been good, I mean, it's just a lot of fertile ground right now, and it's a great time for change.
Absolutely.
And even if you're feeling like the walls are closing in, or the gravity's getting heavy, there's still just a tremendous amount of catalytic energy right now.
Absolutely. All right, we're gonna use that catalytic energy. We'll be back in a few weeks with more Matrix to Mass. Everybody, have a wonderful weekend. This will go out tonight or tomorrow. So have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon. Robert, my buddy, I love doing these with you, and I look forward to the next one. Sayonara.